Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay, welcome back. Our custom is to go around and say our names. I suggest we take a breath maybe after the previous person. And so that we can all absorb who you are. So my name is Cass.
Greg. David.
Laura.
Baruch.
Tim.
Joe.
I'm Joe also.
Grisha.
My name's Carl.
My name is Andre.
I'm Jack.
I'm Larry.
I'm Scott.
Dan.
My name is Jerry.
My name is Jeff.
I'm Bob.
My name is Harley.
Don.
My name is Mark.
Jay.
Ralph.
I'm Andreas.
I'm Richard.
My name is Joe.
John.
My name is Hal.
I'm Mike.
Jason.
Peter.
Tucker.
George. Ricardo.
My name is Stephen.
I'm Tony.
My name is Mark.
And I know Joe, Scott, and Dan are here for the first time.
First time in a long time.
In a long time. Is anybody else here for the first time?
Oh, sorry, Laura.
Lara. Okay. So today we are fortunate to have J.D. Doyle back for the second in this four-part series on intimacy. J.D. has practiced Buddhism since 1997 in the U.S., Thailand, and Burma. Serves as core teacher at the East Bay Meditation Center, one of the most diverse Buddhist sanghas in the world. Has served as a board member and was the co-founder of the LGBTQIA2 meditation group, the Alphabet Sangha. Completed the Spirit Rock Dedicated Practitioner Program and Community Dharma Leader Program. Currently is in the Spirit Rock Teacher Training Program. Holds a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Cornell and a master's degree in language and literacy and sociocultural studies from the University of New Mexico. For over 25 years, they worked as a public school teacher, focusing on issues of equity and access. Identifies as gender non-conforming. They are committed to celebrating the diversity of our human sangha, addressing the impact of racism on our communities, expanding concepts of gender, living in ways that honor the sacredness of the earth. Their website is www.heartmindteaching.com. Welcome, J.D.
So, thank you so much. It's so great to be here, and I'm totally grateful and like how your good friends are like, okay, you can do it. So Baruch's like, how about you come talk about intimacy, to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship? And I'm like always up for like those topics that are usually not covered, and so I said, sure. And I come to think about it, and it's like, but I'm like a failure. I've been in, lots of relationships, but I am not currently in like what would be called a so-called intimate relationship. So some of you may have your PhD in that area, and I do not. And so I come here as somebody to engage in this discussion with you and to look, through the lens of the Buddhist teachings on what it means to be, I think the title is Intimacy in Relationships and the Dharma. So sometimes when I look at the Dharma, I don't actually find, that sense of like, go do whatever you want, have fun. That's not like always the lens of the Dharma. So some of what I say today might be like, oh, that's not really sounds very fun, because, we get this sense of pleasure sometimes as being the epitome of happiness. And those of you who have practiced for a while, which I know many of you have, surprised, learning that pleasure is not always where we find happiness. So I'm going to be kind of looking at that lens today, and really excited to engage in this discussion with you and to share a bit of my perspective on it. So I figured, I better find out a little bit about what these things are that I'm going to talk about. So, I went online, and the definition of intimate is marked by a warm friendship developing through long association, involving or marked by sex or sexual relationships, or intrinsic, essential. So intimate, it's like, that's not a very good definition. Like, what is it? Warm friendship. And so then, I went to the Urban Dictionary, and intimacy is a euphemism for having sex. Given that both parties are into it, intimacy is the one time when they like to have their bodies invaded. Urban Dictionary is often very helpful, and so I was like, okay, all right, what am I really going to talk about? To the Gay Buddhist Fellowship? Might not really. So, in the earliest suttas, so we'll go back to the Dharma, right? The Dharma being, the teachings of the Buddha, the natural laws, and then so we'll kind of bring some of that in. So interestingly enough, in the early Buddhist suttas, the Buddha only mentions sexual misconduct as adultery. And even then, only through the surprise vantage point of a man having adultery, obviously I don't say that word very often, with a woman. So I think, maybe we're, I don't know, a lot of us are fluid in here in our genders, but, that might exclude all of us, so in terms of sexual misconduct in the early Buddhist suttas, it's really looked at in that way. And so, but, what is the purpose of that? And so then there were other things added on later in the later suttas, but the purpose really is non-harming. And so when we look at, what it is, it's about, how do we avoid actions that are harmful to ourselves, and how do we avoid actions that are harmful to others? And to me, that is a really great basis for looking at intimacy. And obviously that is extremely complex because, we are human after all, and what we think is harmful and what is actually harmful and what the other person, and then here we are, these two beings that, or three or four or five, or whatever the community of intimacy is that come together, we are all bringing all of ourselves to that. And so, those of us who grew up in other religions came with traditions around morality and ethics that, kind of were thou shall not. And this exploration of not harming is, very, very much more open-ended. It's not about, thou shall not do this, thou shall not do that. It's very much an investigation. And so we have to engage in that investigation, and try not to cause harm. And so in trying not to cause harm, harm happens. And that sometimes to me is then where the intimacy actually develops. Is in that moment of having engaged with another human being in that place of some sort of infraction, some sort of meeting and then discomfort. that intimacy can evolve. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So part of how we often engage in this relationship with other people is through longing and desire. And oftentimes the longing desire comes from, what it is that I want. What do I want in my life? I'm going to, I want someone to be kind. I want someone to be interested in what I'm doing. I want somebody who will not be exactly like me, but enough like me so that we won't always be clashing, but they'll have like a nice little flair of something else different. I'm going to bring in this person who is different and yet compatible. So I have this idea, this conception, this perception of what would bring joy and harmony and happiness to my life. And so when I bring in this idea of this longing, this emotion of longing almost comes through this place of something that is an object. And so all of a sudden I go from this place of just sort of this construct to a commodification. So if somebody is going to then come into my life and fulfill these needs that I have, which we all know, haven't been around for a lot, as long as, somebody else out there has to do something to make us whole, we're going to end up kind of not where we want to be. So I wanted to share a sutta on this idea of desire, which in the Pali, which is the language closest to the language of the Buddha, is called tanha. And it literally means thirst, longing, and could be either physical or mental, emotional. And so this is from the Sutta Nipata, and that's one of the earliest suttas. It's around the same time as the Dhammapada. And this particular translation, you have to apologize. I have to apologize if you like other translations, but this translation, I don't know how these people did it, but these people, Leslie Fowler Lebkowitz and Tamara Dietrich, are from Australia, and so they're saying that they took poetic license to have this in the meter of Australians. So I apologize if there are Australians here or if you prefer a different translation, but I particularly like this because it was understandable. And so this is the Sutta Nipata 4.1 on desire. You're overjoyed if you get what you want. If you don't, you writhe, a hunter pierced by your own arrow, born of desire, engendering desire, desire-driven. No matter what you long for, a house, land, livestock, gold, serfs, servants, men, women, family, we could add in some other genders in there, men, women, family, innocent things of themselves, the longing overwhelms you till troubles bear down and suffering follows you like water rushing into a leaky boat. So, he continues, but if you're mindful, you evade desire as easily as sidestepping a snake. You're free of the world's sticky traps. Be mindful, abandon desire, bail out the boat, and reach the further shore. And so, there's a few images in here ideas that I want to kind of pull out here. And so the first one is just this process, the cycle that we all get into that's part of the human condition. And so it's not that we can add on this layer of judgment of like, I'm bad, this is not right, I shouldn't do this. It's this using this tool of looking through the lens of being with what's arising. So you're overjoyed if you get what you want. So there's not this overlay of don't do that. It's just like this is what happens. You get what you want and you're overjoyed. That's what goes through us. And if you don't, you writhe, a hunter pierced by your own arrow. And so this is also, some of you may know that there's an image of an arrow where we experience some pain and then we add on all the other stories, and those are like the second and the third arrow, like, oh, why me? It must have been this, who's doing this to me? And we're adding all these arrows in. And so those are the arrows that add on the suffering. And it says, no matter what you long for, the whole list, the longing overwhelms you. So sometimes we can get lost in that place of craving. That's the second, the second noble truth, that our suffering comes from craving, from thinking that if we could only get that person, that house, that job, that, schedule, the body, then everything will be perfect. And this image of the boat, like water rushing into a leaky boat, this sense of like, as long as we're kind of like reaching out here, our energy is just kind of leaking through us. We're not actually in the moment with whoever and whomever is there, including ourselves. Like, how am I showing up? How is this other person showing up? Rather than this image, this perception of that person. And then this last line, bail out the boat. I love that idea of like, we can be mindful. We can begin to see, okay, I really want this. I don't have to judge that. I can just be like, okay, bail out the boat, be with what's arising. And some of the other translations of the sutta, in terms of like, sidestepping the snake, there it says, don't put your foot in the snake's mouth. And I kind of like that as well. So like the snakes are there. Like we have snakes. We all have, the snake in this image may be the temptation or whatever. I mean, isn't it interesting how snakes get that bad rap? I mean, other religions too. I mean, I like snakes. Anyways, don't, evade the snake. So we begin to know those places where we get caught up. And then we can see them more clearly. And so when I think about engaging this from this place of, really humanity, I know, there's suffering in the world, so all of us will have our version of what that looks like. That's the first noble truth. And then the second noble truth is tanha, this craving, this is the principal cause and desire. So that's the turn of like this craving arises in us whenever we see something pleasant, whenever we see something unpleasant, aversion, which is a type of craving. Like, I like that, I want it. I don't like that, I don't want it. So, that's kind of the dance that is going on in each moment. And so then when we're adding in this idea of sensual desire, sexual desire, all of a sudden we have, this body, heart, mind that we think, okay, I kind of understand what's going on here. But there are all these chemical pathways that happen the minute that we get engaged in this idea of sensual, sexual desire. We have lust, we have attraction, we have attachments, and those are just words for these things of like, lust, and all of a sudden all these testosterone and estrogen, all those hormones kind of are bringing us this desire for closeness. This is not even something that I know is going through me. This is kind of this is what's happening here. And then there's the attraction, and then I get some dopamine, and I'm kind of feeling a little better there, and I want more of that, So like, I'm talking not even just about this mental construct of craving. I mean, there's all of this happening in here, that this is like how we're wired. And then, then you get the sexual arousal and a little more dopamine, and then we're thinking, whoa, I want a little more closeness, because dopamine, brings us to that place of like, trust is coming in, I really understand, and this is not through the brain, this is not through our mental construct, this is like, our bodies are just speaking to another body, and, who knows what's happening in that body, and then, we get a little touch, and then the oxytocin comes in, and we want more touch. And it's just this dance, this whole symphony of a chemical reaction in here. And I had the great fortune to teach 7th grade science, which in many, in California in the school districts includes sex ed. And it was one of my most favorite things to teach in 7th grade because, of course, the kids were super interested in it. We probably could have spent the whole year talking about it. And, they could put their questions in a little box without names in it and whatnot. And I got to answer all sorts of questions, which was absolutely beautiful. And one of the most touching questions that somebody asked me, a girl came up after class, And we were talking about, this surge of all these chemicals and this attraction and how it all happens. And she came up and she asked me, but how will I know when I'm in love? If all of this is the chemistry of the body, how will I know when I'm in love? And I was just like, of course, stumped, because, isn't that like one of those age-old questions? Like, how do we know? Like, what is it? What is love? Sexual attraction is one thing, but what is love? And so it's such a beautiful question, and I'm sure I answered it inadequately. And, but feeling, kind of just that sense of like, you're probably going to spend your whole life or a good part of your life, how will I know when I'm in love? If this body is operated from these places of, wanting what is pleasant, and we have this whole host of chemicals, this, biochemical reaction that's telling us that this will be pleasant. And then we have to go back to this place of, if you're mindful, I'm supposed to be mindful of all of that? That's a lot. We're not just talking like in breath, out breath. There's a lot going on. So, one of the things that I think that we can do in terms of this practice is to bring our attention to not only just this role of pleasure, but how is it that we see pleasure as divorced from our engagement with the other? Like, how do we define pleasure in terms of myself and what I want? If we're talking about intimacy being a connection between others. And so, one of the things that I think happens in our culture is that we get really focused individually. We have this individual mindset of success being marked by, how well I do. And there are other cultures that are much more, and I'm talking about dominant kind of mainstream culture, white, patriarchal, heteronormative culture, where capitalist, where we're looking at, success being an exchange, and I'm winning or you're losing, or I'm getting ahead and you're not getting ahead. And so sometimes we apply that to our relationships as well. And so I wanted to share a quote from somebody, a psychologist who's in the area, John Wellwood, who's written a lot about relationships. And I was glad to read when I read his book that he started writing about this after he went through a really messy divorce. So I was like, okay, I'm not the only one who kind of comes to really learning this because I failed at it. I don't really mean I failed, but you know what I mean. So John Wellwood says, usually our view of our partners or our friends is colored by what they do for us, how they make us look or feel good or not. Beyond our movie of the other is a much larger field of personal and spiritual possibilities. What Walt Whitman referred to when he said, I contain multitudes. These multitudes are what keep a relationship fresh and interesting. But they can only nourish our relationship if we can accept the ways those we love are different from us in their background, values, perspectives, qualities, sensitivities, preferences, ways of doing things, and finally, their destiny. So this kind of paradox here of, wanting certain things to fit for us, and this sense of difference, the necessity of that, and background, values, perspectives, qualities, sensitivities, preferences, means that inherent in this intimacy is going to be discomfort. And so this sense of kind of engaging in a connection, not as separate, but as connected and separate, is really imperative. And so the Dalai Lama says, the more we care for the happiness of others, the greater our own sense of well-being becomes. Cultivating a close, warm-hearted feeling for others automatically puts the mind at ease. Well, I'm not so sure it's automatic, but the more we care for the happiness of others, the greater our own sense of well-being becomes. Cultivating a close, warm-hearted feeling for others automatically puts the mind at ease. And I think that it may not be automatic, but maybe for the Dalai Lama it is. And I'm not saying that to be facetious, but I'm just saying that moving from a place of my own self-interest to the self-interest of a collective, of a community, of a relationship, of relationships, and knowing that happiness lies not just in me getting what I want, is truly remarkable. And he continues, it is because our own human existence is so dependent on the help of others that our need for love lies at the very foundation of our existence. Therefore, we need a genuine sense of responsibility and a sincere concern for the welfare of others. And so oftentimes, dependency on others, it really doesn't, the concept of it, you're kind of like, independent. I want to be independent. I want to be able to do exactly what I want when I want it. That's another place of ending up in that place of craving, of desire. We all know these bodies. If I could be independent, this body would not have the pains that it has. I would not have to, when it breaks down, ask somebody for help to get to the grocery store. I would not have to. I'm dependent on the very food that I eat, on millions of not just humans, but the microbes in the soil to support me. I'm so intimately connected. This myth of independence that can fuel this desire and longing to be something other than I am. And so as we kind of acknowledge and begin to cultivate this sense of connectivity, this sense of interdependence, and I think of in our culture, when my dad had cancer, and I remember when he started having to wear adult diapers, and I think they're called Depends. To be dependent, that means you're wearing adult diapers. You're dependent. Rather than this sense of interconnection, that we are dependent on each other. We support each other. We're interwoven, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, interbeing. And after I was helping my dad out, I was amazed because how when you begin to see something, then it arises, you're mindful of it, then I felt like every time I went to the drugstore, I was in line behind somebody who was buying for themselves or for someone else adult diapers. Become one of those things where we don't always see these places because we want an image of the world to fit the pleasant nature that we all want. That happiness does not include that. But what if it does? What if it does include it? And it's not to say that we can have ease with facing these things. And so for me, one of the most intimate moments in my life was being with my dad as he passed, as he was sick. And I'm sure many of you have had that experience of the vulnerability and the courage that it takes to be in those situations. So that's far removed from craving. That's a different degree of intimacy, which really comes with the facing and turning towards the discomfort, turning towards the humans who are actually there in that situation, not based on objects or commodification. Bell Hooks says, genuine love is rarely an emotional space where needs are instantly gratified. sometimes, right, when we get that, wow. Genuine love is rarely an emotional space where needs are instantly gratified. To know love, we have to invest time and commitment. Dreaming that love will save us, solve all our problems, or provide a steady state of bliss or security only keeps us stuck in wishful fantasy, undermining the real power of love, which is to transform us. Many people want love to function like a drug, giving them an immediate and sustained high. They want to do nothing, just passively receive the good feeling. So this quote is also turning towards that same place of this engagement. You know, that we have that pleasant feeling, and then there's the engagement, because as we know with our practice, impermanence means that pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, we are riding those waves. And so to expect that this body, heart, mind will always be pleasant, that someone else's body, heart, mind will always be pleasant, that the two of us, the three of us, or whatever community is engaged will always engage in pleasantries, is a fantasy. And that sense that it will solve all our problems is also a fantasy. And so our mindfulness, our practice of coming back to being with what is actually here rather than these fantasies is so essential in this practice. So I really, and I haven't been able to quite articulate it yet, but I really think that this truth of impermanence, not only of our bodies, heart, and minds, the impermanence not only of the pleasant, unpleasant, neutral that we can be mindful of, but this interaction between impermanence and interconnectedness and suffering, which happen to be the three characteristics, dukkha, anicca, and anatta. Dukkha being suffering, anatta being non-self interconnectedness, and then, all right, I just forgot it. Impermanence, non-self, and interconnectedness. So those three are at this crux of what it means to be intimate. You know, how do we form these bonds of intimacy in this changing flow, knowing that it will change? How do I become vulnerable? How do I become courageous? That's just a question that I don't have an answer to. And but for me, I'm going to share another quote from Bell Hooks, because for me, basically what it means is to really open this idea of what it means to be intimate. I mean, what does it mean to connect across differences, to connect between each other? And she says, Bell Hooks says, we can begin the process of making community wherever we are. We can begin by sharing a smile, a warm greeting, a bit of conversation, by doing a kind deed, or by acknowledging kindness offered to us. Doing this, we engage in love practice. We lay foundations for the building of community with strangers. The love we make in community stays with us wherever we go. With this knowledge as our guide, we make any place we go a place we return to love. And so I think about the places that we can open to be vulnerable. Like, how do we take those risks with strangers, with those that we may have perceptions and ideas of being different, that we may be caught in our ideas of who is lovable and who we can connect to, that we might miss the opportunities that are there for love. So in our practice, we have so many opportunities to look for ways to break through our perceptions of what we think will provide us happiness. The chemistry, the biology that happens in us that drives us in certain directions, our familial and cultural patternings, and using our mindfulness to turn towards those difficulties, to turn towards it, to really get an understanding of what is there, what is happening, is a really deep and lifelong practice. And we know that oftentimes the teachings that have come through us from the past are don't always feel accurate, in this day and age, and we kind of like, that doesn't quite work. So I wanted to share this little story, and some of you I think may have heard it before, about a monk who was working with some other monks to copy some texts, some old text. And then he notices that, the monks are copying copies and not the original text. And so he goes to the head monk and he asks him if he can go down and look at the old text to see them and familiarize himself with that. And the head monk says, go ahead, we've been copying these for a long time, but, centuries, but, please go in, so he goes into the cellar and through all the doors and finds the old text. And hours later, nobody has seen him, and one of the monks goes to look for him, and he hears sobbing coming from the back of the building, and he finds the old monk and the young monk leaning over one of the original books, and they're just crying. And he asks what's wrong, and he says, "The word is celebrate. Celebrate, not celebrate." Says the old monk with tears in his eyes. So I think, we all need to interpret, kind of work with the teachings as they are and go back to them and confirm for ourselves, what it is that we need to do and how it is that we need to approach and engage in this conversation. So thank you so much for your kind attention. We have some time for questions, and so I welcomed any and all questions. Please.
I don't know exactly how to ask. By the way, thank you. You stimulated so much. Most or all of what you discussed about intimacy was reference to another. And I'm wondering about the idea of being intimate with yourself and not mindfulness intimacy, but something very parallel to what you were talking about. Do people talk about that? And what does it mean? But I feel like that's been a goal I've had.
Absolutely. And when I talked to Baruch, he said that was kind of what you were focused on last week. So I kind of focused on others this week, but I appreciate you bringing that in, because I didn't mean at all to indicate that this journey does not work with just a singular, or just not even, singular and interconnect with this person, that. So thank you for bringing that in. It's definitely as complicated, so thank you.
Thank you, JD. I had the same thought that arose last week during Baruch's talk, and it had to do with how, in order to be intimate, either with yourself or with others, or with yourself when you're sitting on the cushion, the most important thing is you have to show up. That's the best way I have of saying it, but it has to do with being honest with yourself and with others. It has to do with being aware of what's happening with you right in this moment, and not being afraid to share whatever comes up. So I always think of showing up as being a big part of intimacy, as well as many other activities.
Yes, I think showing up is essential, and that's where, to me, the practice of mindfulness comes in, because if I'm actually here with who and what is showing up, I have to kind of turn towards it and have that opening welcome for it. So, yeah. And it's amazing how delusion and ignorance, the power of delusion and ignorance, can, cloud the mind. I can believe so easily, especially when some of those chemicals come in, that, oh, yeah, I'm not working on my self-interest right now. the other person is just as excited about this as I am. Sometimes true, sometimes not, but those filters, that is amazing how hard it is sometimes to see through.
Just to be present.
And some of the cultural baggage that we bring around, who we're supposed to be and what it's supposed to look like. And so, yeah, thank you. Please.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. It's great. Something that came back to me is reading Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, back in the 70s, I guess. He talks about falling in love versus real love. So falling in love is when you have all those chemicals going on, you see nothing wrong with that person, and then one day you go in the bathroom, and that person's thrown the towel on the floor, and you go, how dare they? That's the real love. And unfortunately, in our society, we see all the romantic love on the screen and the books, but we don't really see the real love. I mean, we do see, but it's not called real love. It's just kind of like, it's a part of the relationship. So I always try to remember that when I fall in love, because it feels so good, and we want to keep going back to that again. But I don't think it can be there, but it doesn't last.
And then what do you think about like all this reality TV now with like real love then just becomes drama, right?
Yeah.
Like then the
Well, it is
towels.
drama.
I mean,
But you know how to work with the drama.
exactly. And so then there's the attachment to the other kind of energy in the body rather than the kind of more subtle that you're talking about. Okay, the towel's on the floor. This is not the biggest event in my day, but this is the...
Well, I never thought about falling in love, the chemical thing, and then going to real love, which there is another chemical. It's like, I'm angry. Or you don't like me because you throw the towel on the floor. What happened before I saw you was this perfect person.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you for your talk. And what came up for me, the image of you and your dad brought up the image of me and my mom, and like how the idea of how illness can kind of erase the fear of intimacy almost immediately. And like some of the most deeply connected moments I had with my mother were when she was old and sick and dying, and I was there when she got her diagnosis of lung cancer. And my dad, with my father, with other family members, and last night, actually, this is why it's really raw right now for me. I have a kindergarten student who's told me that his cousin had to have surgery, had a tumor, and I had her in kindergarten, and she's now like 10 years old or something. And so I was in a hospital last night for a 12-step meeting. She came to mind. I had her mother's cell phone number, and I texted her mom, and I said, "This is Mr. Higwood. I heard that Buson's in surgery. I hope she's okay. Tell her I love her, and send her healing wishes." And the bubble went right away. The bubble came back, the text bubble, and she said, "This is Buson. My mom gave me her cell phone for Christmas." And I was like, boom. Then I was like, from this mom to like in the hospital bed with a 10-year-old, and it's like, wow, intimate, And so I'm just really feeling that, and like, why does it have to take illness sometimes? Like, I think of how I was not really intimate with her in kindergarten. She was actually a very challenging student. And how the illness can erase all that and bring you right into like love and compassion and intimacy. So that's a reflection more than a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's such a beautiful connection. It's just one moment that you're talking about. Did you have something in the back? Yeah.
I like that Australian translation of the sutra, and my mind is thinking about, I want to look it up or hear you say it again, particularly the part right before the leaky boat. What is it that the water leaks in, but that's the metaphor.
So it goes to, no matter what you long for, a house, land, livestock, gold, serfs, servants, a person, family, the longing overwhelms you till troubles bear down and suffering follows like a water rushing into a leaky boat. So that the longing is what
leads to the
Yeah.
trouble.
So this the desire, not the actual having of those things, which is kind of what we were talking about too. Is like actually I'm in relationship now. I don't have to long for it anymore.
Where did I ask for it?
Yeah, I asked for it. Here it is. Yeah, but I can give you the names of those if you wanted to look it up.
I look forward to hearing your talk again on the podcast, which I hardly ever do, but I will be absolutely sure to do. You gave me so much to think about. And the leaky boat was the one metaphor I wanted to talk about. When you're in love with someone, and they're in love with you, but you can't, through circumstances, be together, it seems to me, obviously, that the first thing you do is you patch the holes in the leaky boat so it doesn't leak anymore. But the added difficulty for me is that the Limelighters had a song where they said, it was about a woman who becomes like the Russians, quote unquote, and she says, how miserable it is to be happy, how happy it is to be miserable. And I'm in the place of being really happy that I'm having this unfulfilled longing, maybe because it's as close as I can get to the person. But I don't know what to do with that except, I guess, just keep bailing the water out, and eventually maybe I'll just keep doing that forever. As long as this person is in my life. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. So you want to bail on the relationship? But I'm fun.
Well, I mean, if we look at these teachings, it's the relationship to the longing.
Mm-hmm.
So, the happiness and the unhappiness are part of life. So, I mean, it's easier to talk about chocolate chip cookies, than it is. That's where I'm talking about, like when we get in relationships, it's a lot more challenging. So, this sense, but the sense of inconstancy or impermanence, that we'll get to that place and it will be, So I don't know. It sounds like you have great practice.
I mean, trying to use it as such. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Please.
Maybe you already said that, but I think being in a perennial state of longing really rescues you from, oh, this is what it is. It's now I have it. So what's next? If you just long and long and long, you don't have to reconcile yourself with something being closed or terminated or coming in a package. You can always long for something better, and you never have to go to this watch if you ask, you may get it kind of place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, grass is always greener, kind of. Thank you.
So, well, relationships are kind of like, I relate to them as anthropology, kind of. Something to explore the distance, maybe. So I'm curious about the issue of dependence. Is dependence like bad practice? Or is it an opportunity to look at? It seems to be a form of craving, and so is it good practice to kind of always examine the dependence, and then if you're in a relationship, are you always examining the connection to the other person, or how you need the other person, or what you need from them, and so that kind of takes you out of the relationship in a way. So I'm just putting out there my own kind of unfamiliarity with the subject of dependence, and and whether that's how it connects to practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, you know, in that quote from the Dalai Lama, he talks about how we all are dependent, you know, so oftentimes I hear it translated as, you know, we're all interconnected. You know, the Thich Nhat Hanh using interbeing, because I think dependence does mean like, I'm taking too much, I'm taking from you, you're taking from me. Like, in my mind, that dependent kind of brings that in, of like, you're trying to find a balance. And so here, I think it's being used in a way to acknowledge that that's how we actually exist, that we exist in dependence, and we exist dependent on each other, dependent on the earth, dependent on that, on this community, both of humans and plants and animals, you know, for our very life. Each breath is dependent on, you know, so I think while there is that anthropological need of like kind of always being reflective and curious and investigating, the overlay of our societal conditioning around what it means to be dependent, as opposed from the actual reality of it, is kind of a real fertile ground to look at, because to try to maintain that independence in a body that's aging and breaking down every moment, you know, is going to lead to suffering. And so how do we ask for help?
Connection.
Yeah, yeah. So, I don't know, is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
I think this is the last one, so.
Oh, that's a lot of responsibility. It's a great discussion. Thank you so much. You brought up so many topics, and I've been thinking about a number of concepts that come to mind. We talk about dependent or interdependence, and I'm increasingly impressed with the notion and the scientific data that seems to establish that everything is in correspondence. I mean, everything is like, everything is interactive. I mean, there is nothing, this whole idea we hear a lot about, this notion that we're setting ourselves up with the thought of separation. Well, if everything is in correspondence, and in fact, part of the correspondence is the physical stuff, the mental stuff, the psychological stuff. I think what gets me into trouble is all that stuff is going on, and my mind is like trying to like figure it out and make it like and make it sort of like fit with cultural notions I have of where do I want to go, where do I want to be, does this person need to be harmed, you know, and the yearning for these things that we may think we want totally distract us from being aware of the correspondence. I don't know if this is making any sense, but the thing that comes to mind to me is we're doing ourselves a great deal better if we can just try and pay attention to the correspondence that's like happening right now, and bear in mind whatever values we think about what is important and where we want to go with our lives, and try to let go of the whole figuring out, the whole yearning thing, the whole just like anyway, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for helping me put that together.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
The Sangha is having a day-long retreat on Saturday, March 23rd, right here, from 10 to 5, on the subject of wisdom stories about death and afterlife. And the teacher will be Cindy Spring. There's no cost, and I believe a meal will be provided. And so you have to register though to attend. So there's some flyers out on the credenza with more information. And I guess there'll be more reminders as time goes on. But it's Saturday, March 23rd. Next week, the series on intimacy continues with Reverend Dagon Gaither. He began his Buddhist practice in 1995 in the Vipassana tradition. He received lay ordination in 2006 when he was given the name Dagon, or Great Vow. He received priest ordination in July of 2011. His work practice and free time include many hours devoted to community service including work as a sister of perpetual indulgence and as a volunteer at the Zen Hospice Project. So that'll be next week. Dana is the Pali word for generosity. Our host will be going around with the Dana Bowl. We ask for whatever you're prepared to give. $10 is a suggested donation, but the ball is in your court. The funds are used for us to offer Dana to our Dana speakers, and for the Larkin Street Meal Project once a month, and for the newsletter that we put out every 3 months. So please give generously. And do we have a host today?
I am your hostess today, aka the bitch with the bowl. There are gluten-free cookies and berries and nuts, which are good for vegans. There's a sign-up sheet over here on the credenza. There's water for tea. Please put your cup in the dishwasher when you're done. Some people go out to eat after. You're welcome to join them. I think I covered it.
Any other announcements? Yes.
February 3rd, Saturday, is the next meeting of the Radical Dharma Book Group. We're reading a book called Things That Make White People Uncomfortable by Michael Bennett, a football player, actually. And so if you're interested, the emails went out, but not everybody is necessarily on the same emails and whatnot. So if you're curious about it and want more information, you can talk to me right after this. But I think it's on Sunday the 3rd. Yeah.
Yes.
I guess I'll just put a plug out there. I'm part of a teaching team that's doing a 4-week series, so we have 3 labs start tomorrow night at East Bay Meditation Center. Balance, Not Busy, Creating a Nourishing Life. So that's tomorrow night and the next 3 Sundays in Oakland. So it's on the website for the East Bay Meditation Center, or you can ask me about it. I'll have some information.
Tomorrow's Monday, isn't it?
What's that? Monday.
Monday.
What did I say? Sorry, Monday nights. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, and a reminder, your website is www.heartmindteaching.com. So, can we gather for a dedication of marriage?
There's the little bell.
Oh,
It's over there.
the big bell?
Big bag. Taking a moment to reflect on our time together this morning, our intentions to bring wisdom, beauty, peace to ourselves and all beings, knowing that our actions and thoughts and intentions ripple out in all directions. May we offer any merit from our practice to all beings in all directions. May all beings, without exception, be free from suffering and the causes of suffering.
Thank you, J.D.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.